The Formula One Imola Grand Prix was a boring race up until the very end. Real ones, get on in here, let me know what y'all think. But that final stint between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris made the whole race absolutely worth it. Now, if you were watching, in the beginning, Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, they had both had great launches off the line, but Max Verstappen really seemed like 10 laps in to really have settled into his pace, and what was a previously like a 1 second gap between the two of them had really opened up into like a 4 or 5 second gap. And at this point, I was sitting there watching the race thinking like, okay, Max Verstappen is going to ride off into the sun again, because you know what, that is just what to expect. Because Lando Norris, although he had won last week, it could have just been a fluke. He could have just been a fluke in Miami, and that could have just been something that we could have, because that's just something we have just come to expect watching F1 for the last like 2 years, is Max Verstappen riding off into the sunset. And yo, real ones, let me know what y'all think. But when it really came down to it, in the final stint, Lando Norris was about 5 seconds away from Max Verstappen, and he was actually catching up to him. And this makes me think about the final stint over in Miami when Lando Norris was literally pulling away from Max Verstappen, and Max was all over the radio, angry, pushing really hard, and that he could not actually claw back the win. And for a second in Miami, I was thinking maybe Max Verstappen was just letting Lando have this, but it's clearly become clear to me that Max Verstappen and Red Bull, maybe not Checo Perez, but they are caught. They have finally been caught. That McLaren has finally caught up to them. And just to think of the grand story that is McLaren, a year ago, we were completely writing them off. And now a year later, they are regularly possibly fighting for wins and could even be fighting for the championship by next year, which is absolutely amazing. Now, on the other hand, Max Verstappen pulled away at the end. I mean, he didn't pull away at the end, but like literally the final, Max Verstappen really put in his best laps towards the end. He had a black and white flag, so he couldn't go over track limits, so he had to stay within the actual confines of the track, and he couldn't just like play loose and fast. And Lando Norris, like, people are calling Imola a boring race because they're saying like, oh, like there's no chances for them to overtake. But I feel like, and if anybody else agrees with me, please let me know, because I really feel like part of the thing that makes watching F1 so good is you get to see drivers drive the pinnacle of motorsport on the knife's edge of the car. So you get to see them literally fighting the car to keep it on the racing line. On that final stint, on those final couple laps, Lando Norris was literally coming out of turn 4 wiggling, like he was almost about to send it right into the gravel and completely throw it away. And you could tell that he was pushing, and his engineer kept giving him updates, and Lando just being so casual, as if like he's in the final realm of Call of Duty Modern Warfare, in the final zone, just being like, guys, I got this, relax. And Max Verstappen was clearly trying to like keep it on. He had to really fight for that one, and it's crazy to hear him like realize that, oh, like he has to fight for this now, that he has to actually work for all of these wins. He had to work for the Q1, he had to work for qualification yesterday when he got that toe from, I think it was Magnussen, and he was able to fully pull out a pole lap. His 8th in a row, I think, effectively tying Ayrton Senna, which is pretty crazy, right? He had to work last week. He had to work in Miami to actually try to catch up to Lando Norris, and then he couldn't. But now Lando Norris is right there. Lando got his 3rd straight drivers of the day, which is absolutely warranted. But it also makes me think, Oscar Piastri, I feel like, had the best race weekend out of everybody aside from Max Verstappen, who obviously, well, not really, Max Verstappen didn't have a great race weekend, but Oscar Piastri, when it came down to it, had such a good race, and he had such a good weekend. If it wasn't for his engineer completely just muffing it, and he was actually, I think he was impeding because he didn't hear somebody coming up behind him, so he was impeding, so he got a grid penalty, I really believe that maybe Oscar Piastri could have been a better chance at fighting for that win, because in that opening stint, Oscar Piastri was fast. Carlos Sainz and Ferrari, we'll talk about them in a second, but Carlos Sainz was on the radio saying that, wow, the McLaren is fast, and you could really hear that Carlos Sainz was not expecting that McLaren to be as fast as it was, and that he really had to like keep him behind him. But it also shows something that I just mentioned before, that yes, Imola is a hard place to overtake, because there's really only one true DRS zone to allow them to overtake, and because of the way that these F1 cars are, they don't really run close enough, so that's why they can't really overtake each other on the brakes too often, so which is kind of unfortunate. But just generally, like, Oscar Piastri had a great race, and Ferrari, I feel like they're just like perpetually in second and third place, and we were all really hyped for the upgrades. I mean, like, I was personally thinking, like, okay, maybe we could start to see Ferrari like hit P1. Maybe we could start to see Charles Leclerc actually get a win, because Charles Leclerc has been in the top 4 of almost every single race. And I saw this in a Reddit comment, but someone pointed out that in many other racing series, this would leave Charles Leclerc in possibly in first place in the championship, because his consistency has been absolutely stellar, but he hasn't won a race. He's on the podium again. He was second, he was third, he was fourth. He's been all of these, but he hasn't been in first place. And I really feel like we were all thinking that with these upgrades, that finally Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz could actually take that step forward to challenge Red Bull, well, to challenge Max, because we'll get to Checo in a second, but to actually challenge Red Bull, and they weren't able to do it. Like they were there. I think Charles like led for a little bit. You know, they were there, but like they just weren't ever truly there. Like they were all on equal pace on the final stint, but like it was just things here and there, and they just weren't doing it. Clearly, the strongest team this weekend was McLaren, which is absolutely mind-blowing when you think of McLaren over the past year, that they were the ones. Like last year, we were completely writing off McLaren. We were completely thinking that there was no way that they could catch up with Red Bull, but they clearly have. And when I say before that, like McLaren and Lando and Oscar and even Ferrari has finally caught up with Max, they haven't caught up with Red Bull, because Checo Perez had a shit race. And it's funny because during free practice 1 and 2, I saw that Max Verstappen was having trouble, and I'm like, I have Checo Perez in my F1 fantasy league. I'm in an F1 fantasy league where you're not allowed to choose Red Bull as a team constructor, or you're not allowed to choose Max Verstappen. So I just, but I'm able to choose Checo, and I normally choose Checo because generally, like, he's gonna get me the most points. But I'm like, let me drop Checo, and I'm so happy I did, because homie did not even make Q3 and had a bad race and effectively lost like 5 seconds by going off the gravel on the final 2 turns up until the final on the it was like lap like 25 or whatever, and clearly shows that I think Checo, like, I don't think he lost himself the seat this weekend, but I think this is just one of the many instances over the last couple weeks, and as we will see as the races go up until Silverstone, when they probably finally announce that Checo's not going to be renewed. And I really think that's going to be the case. Lewis Hamilton, had a decent race. He got out-qualified by George Russell again. He didn't get that much screen time. And actually, now I think of it, maybe he didn't have a decent race. Maybe he had like an okay race, because he went off a couple times, but he was really catching up to George on that final stint. And honestly, I really felt like they kind of robbed us from that when they pitted George early in order to get the fastest lap, because they had a free pit stop, because the gaps as they were, they had a free pit stop to Checo Perez. So they weren't necessarily worried about losing that place. So, like George ended up getting fastest lap, but we could have had a nice battle between Lewis and George, because we know for a fact that George would have held on to that as if he was fighting for the world title himself at that point, which is, it really feels like Aston Martin has completely just like, last year at this time, it felt like Aston Martin was going to be fighting for the World Constructors Championship. It really felt that, okay, well, maybe not Constructors Championship, because Lance Stroll wasn't that good, but the point is like that at least Fernando Alonso was going to be. And now like they've just continued to fall further and further back. Fernando Alonso had a shit race. He had a shit race weekend after he went into the gravel during quali yesterday, so he ended up losing that spot. But then shout outs to Lance Stroll, man. The rich boy actually like came through and like had a pretty decent race. I think he scored a point, give or take. So shout outs to Lance Stroll, like doing what he was supposed to do. V-Carb, man, like, wow, like Yuki Tsunoda should definitely be considered for that second Red Bull seat. And I feel like the fact that they haven't, like, the fact that it seems like he's not being properly considered for it just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, the two of them, Danny and Yuki, didn't actually stay too close. They kind of fell out of the top 5. There was no way, like Yuki fell out of the top 5. There was no way they were gonna keep up on race pace. But I'm just saying, like, Yuki has really been doing so good. Yuki is the next race is gonna be at Monaco, which I'm excited for because I'm an F1 fan. Like, I like the pageantry. Yes, it's going to be a procession, but it's gonna really be about quali, and we could be up for probably the best quali of the season. I say that because quali has been excellent the last couple weeks, especially in Miami and especially in Imola, because they were like hundreds, if not, there were hundreds off of Max Verstappen. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, and Charles Leclerc. So, we have about 4 people that could theoretically be in contention for the win next week at Monaco. Like 4 people, all right? Oscar Piastri could put on a good lap. Lando Norris could put in a good lap. Max Verstappen, of course, and Charles Leclerc, who could finally get a win at his home area. But let me know what y'all think. But it really feels like Charles Leclerc is kind of cursed when it comes to Monaco. But I really hope that's not the case, especially when he was on pole all those years ago, and then he crashed out at the final on his final lap, and then he ended up having a drive shaft error. Oh man, so bad. And hopefully we get some rain so we can kind of spice it up. Anyways, that's all for me. What did y'all think about the race? Let me know what you think in the comments. It's your boy Jacques. Shout outs to the real ones. If y'all want to support, you know how to do it, but thanks for all the donations so far. I'll see y'all on the next one. Peace.